speak. Because in my case, it was close friends and family who said to me, Stella, shut up. You are endangering us. It is not just about you, Stella, as an individual who was tortured, who doesn't know your story. Shut up. You are making our life difficult. And so for the safety of my friends and family, sometimes even for the safety of the professionals who are working with me, I had to silence my pain. However, by doing that, the evidence, the story is disappeared. It's kept under the table. Solomon, tell me when I overshoot my time because I could go on and on and on. Having said that, I think what is important is to use this moment as a trigger to build a pushback. We must not allow ourselves to be silenced or intimidated. The state is mandated constitutionally to protect and give us security. When they fail miserably in this constitutional responsibility, it is the duty of citizens to build our own security. And part of building our own security is going to start by allowing us to resist. Somebody talked about the closing out of space. Like yes, perhaps we can no longer go on the streets to protest, but perhaps we can have alternative means of effective activism where masses are encouraged to take on what the elite are conceptualizing and thinking. The debate must stop being about elitism versus the common man. I want to call for an egalitarian approach that involves the masses, one to speak out, to take on this burden. Many times the abductors come and the people around us are everyday men and women struggling as much as we are to put food to our table. When the drones come, the border men nearby us and the woman who sells whatever she's selling next to us, and our neighbors, in the case of Kakwenza, it was his neighbors who were able to take selfies or pictures using their phones. All those people must be mobilized and conscientized and activated to take on action, perhaps to spread the word. If Kakwenza had not shared his tweet about these men are outside my door, they are breaking my door, if he hadn't recorded his conversation with Aaron, if those of us who were expecting him in the time around Christmas to be with us, to engage with us, if we were not following up with his story, perhaps we wouldn't have known. But what if his neighbors, the people in the flats around his small house, had also participated in raising the consciousness of the masses? And so I think that what I want to offer is to build on this momentum that has been created by Kakwenza's case, to say it is time to resist, to resist the intimidation. The beatings that are physical are, one, to silence the victim, two, to silence dissidents and silence dissent, but three, that we yield. And I think what I'm calling all of us to do is to say no. Our voice will not be taken away from us. Our ability, however small, to take action, begin teaching around the importance of fighting back is important. So I want to thank you so much, because maybe one last thing, because I've spoken 6 points. One last thing I want to say is we cannot shut out allies, whether they are East African, or from the global world. That part of the pressure that we are going to be our own saviors. We're going to liberate Uganda ourselves. Those of us who are residents, citizens, national, or people with vested interest in Uganda, we are the ones to liberate ourselves from these torturers. However, we need allies to build solidarity and take action on our behalf and create an arm of pressure on the government that exposes and shares and amplifies the issues we are raising. We cannot say that it's not that a mere statement from an embassy is not good enough. We cannot denigrate an honorary membership from PEN Germany's Writers in Prison program. We cannot say it is not good enough for foreigners in Kenya, for example, to voice and have a hashtag saying free kakwenza or whatever, because the people outside the borders are perhaps more able to take on some of the amplification and replication of the messages we want to take out. And so I think for me that while much
Yeah.
more can be done by our ambassadors and the embassies and the donors and all of that, the little that they're doing must be appreciated. And lastly, we must call out these foreign funders of torture. The people who are arming Uganda with armaments must be called out for their duplicity and hypocrisy, because bilateral relations notwithstanding, I think that we know particular countries in the EU and Northern America that are funding torture in Uganda, and they must be called out. The duplicity must be called out. They cannot be demanding for human rights with the left hand and beating or arming our beaters with the chiboko to beat us. So
All right.
I think I have tabled a number of issues, and I want to thank you very much. Have a good engagement. I hope it doesn't stop at just I hope it goes to much more than just this, and that there'll be some citizen action involving both the elite and the masses. Thank you very much.
Dr. Stella Nyanzi, thank you. If you could just stay with us. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you very much. A special thank you to the Uganda People's Defense Forces, which is also in this call. The official Twitter handle of the Uganda People's Defense Forces is also listening in closely in the different voices that are coming from different Ugandans against torture. The UPDF, maybe we could get officials from there, as well as the UPDF spokesperson Felix Kulaije Afande. Thank you for being part of the call. Hopefully we can hear reactions from the state itself, Ofono Pondo, Duncan Abigaba. We have officials from the government of Uganda's official account is closely listening in. The UPDF's account is closely listening in. Can we hear you speak up on these issues? Well, it's time for you to speak back or to talk back. Your views and thoughts on torture, and I'll give each of us a minute or two to say something, and then we can come back and close with action points from this space, and we see how we can actually where do we go from here as a citizenry. We have over 2,620 people on the call. Earlier on, we had hit about 2,780 on the call. This is quite a big audience for us to voice out our concerns and to build a critical mass and demand for end to torture in Uganda in all our different spaces, whether we're in government offices, whether we are in the army, whether we're in the police force, whether we are in CMI or whatever, or civil society, or all of us as Ugandans. It's time for us to raise up and stand up and say no to torture. I have personally put my foot down, and I am going to continue to speak up against torture, because we all are humans. We all bleed red when we are injured, because we are all, when we are beaten, we feel pain. When they use pliers and electricity on us, we all feel pain. Today you may decide to be quiet, tomorrow it will be you in that space. And because you did not speak up against torture, you will be held as well accountable, and no one will speak up for you. It's your time to speak back. I'll give you an opportunity to say a word or two in a minute or two, and then we can come back and wrap it up. A special thank you to Alan Darren Cheyune. Alan Darren Cheyune is a journalist with the BBC, as well as with the Daily Monitor. He's a sports commentator and also a journalist covering different spheres. Thank you so much for co-hosting this space, Alan. We appreciate you very much. All right, a couple of hands are up. I would love to give an opportunity to Jackie Oloya. After Jackie, then I will give an opportunity to Andrew Karamaji. I will also give an opportunity to Mr. Wangadi, as well as Ramsdale Semuju, for you to say a word or two. If you've been given an opportunity, you can just spend a minute or two to put your message across. I'll start with Jackie or lawyer. Jackie.
Thank you very much, Solomon, and thanks a lot for bringing us on this space. And at the same time, I would like to thank everyone who has sacrificed to tune into this space. I think it affects everyone. I'm talking from a perspective of a child hailing from northern Uganda and having grown up at the time of the war and having witnessed, even among my siblings, who went through torture in the hands of the military in Uganda. And whenever I see torture being meted on the different people in Uganda, it brings back memories, sad memories of my childhood. Having seen my elder brothers who were rounded up, and I think many of you know the word Kandoya. And Kandoya is a famous and very a word that is not loved in northern Uganda, actually in particular where I hail from, because most of our brothers, at that time I was a little girl, and my brothers, one of them up to today has been disabled as a result of Kandoya. So when we talk about torture, torture in Uganda did not start today or yesterday, and did not start just with the few we have listened to. It has been growing. The magnitude has grown. But my point here, Uganda is our home. Uganda is for all of us. We all want to live home in harmony and happily. So as we see this torture magnifies and grows, I think the best you've done is to open this space. I don't want to say so much today, but I think the best is from a medical perspective, when you want to solve a problem, is you have to diagnose it. I think talking about this, we are giving diagnosis to this problem that is maiming most of our loved ones, and some have lost even their lives. And some are undergoing torture as we speak on this space today. For those outside the country, it is always a nightmare. We are in fear. Even as I speak now, I don't know when I come, because I am trying to blame this terrible act being meted on my fellow citizens. And always, the culture is that we shouldn't speak about it. So way forward is, I would like to urge all Ugandans to speak out and to record, like Council Pio said, all the torture and injustices being meted on citizens, so that we have an account, so that someday someone can also testify that I was tortured. And here are the evidence. I also call upon our security personnel in Uganda that we all want to love you and your families, but it is hard to love someone who tortures you, someone who tortures your loved ones, someone who maims your loved ones. And finally, I would like to say we should continue to speak out as Ugandans on tales and cases of torture and other injustices, because we want a Uganda that all of us can live in harmony and peace in this century and time. Thank you very much, Solomon. Thanks a lot.
Jackie, your lawyer, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Um, and you've said something that those in the security forces are our fathers, they're our brothers, they're our uncles, they're our mothers, sisters, nieces, nephews. And sometimes when we, like Council Nicholas Opio said, if we generalize, then we blanket them amidst the culprits who torture people. And so, for example, I know that there's so many men and women in the UPDF that are against torture. So many men and women in the Uganda police who are against torture. And I think it's time for us to isolate those people who commit these atrocities individually, instead of just having a blanket statement of, the security forces, you know. Um, yeah. But thank you very much. Let me bring in Andrew Karamaji. Andrew.
Thank you, Solomon. We should impress upon ourselves, if we haven't already gotten it, that there is no humane way to rule people against their will. If you consider incidents that have happened through the lifetime of the ruling junta, Mukura, Buchura massacres, the war in the north, Kayunga, Kasese, November 18 and 19, all these incidents form a pattern. And so my conclusion or take on this question is that we have two choices. Either we accept this kind of misrule and all the methods required for its enforcement, or we reject it in its totality. We cannot, on the one hand, pick a myoga and say this works and then protest against the theft of public funds. We cannot endorse the joke called the parish model, which, if you look in the budget, has no money, and then condemn high taxes. It is these kinds of prevarications that keep us held down. I believe that we should reject not merely certain specific practices, but the greater aim for which these are essential. As my brother Ivan Okuda observed, and correctly so, torture is a core component of the ruling establishment that we have. The two cannot be separated. They are peas in a pod. And so for me, to protest in the name of morality against excesses or abuses does not quite cover it. The NRA is an all-pervasive system, as the incidents I mentioned at the beginning show. And my second and final point is that every other day we hear people talking about how one day this will come to an end. Unfortunately, whether you consider contemporary or recent or even medieval history, tomorrow never comes. We should throw out the notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure a problem like this. Oppressive systems can actually live on for years and centuries if nothing is done about it. So, my fellow Ugandans, just like our brothers and sisters in other countries on the continent have done, I think it's time we realize, one, that the current establishment has lost legitimacy, and we should organize and rise up in whatever way we can. Those who can sing should sing, those who can speak should speak, writers and all that should do whatever they can with the singular and united objective of bringing Museveni's family rule to an end. Spaces,
Can,
articles in the papers,
can
documentaries, and other court cases are
Andrew,
important, but in a situation where, yes, Solomon.
um Andrew, I hope you can wrap it up, Andrew, because I can see so
Yes,
many
please.
hands. Yeah.
Yes, for me, spaces, articles in the papers, documentaries, and all these other things are important. But in a situation where we have a judiciary and parliament that are in bed with the dictatorship, we have to go the full 9 yards and rid ourselves of this illegitimate and murderous regime. Thank you, Solomon.
All right, Andrew. I would love to say that the views expressed on this space are for people. Otherwise, I'm going to be charged with offensive communication as well. But yeah,
In Solomon, in law, that disclaimer does not save you. Just saying.
Duncan Abigaba. Duncan Abigaba, thank you so much for joining us. Is the Deputy Director GCIC, and that is under the State House. Duncan, you're welcome to give your views on torture. I would also love to add that these views are for the people. And we're just providing these spaces, but specifically, the conversation today is on torture. Not really rising up against government or what, but it's so much on torture. Duncan Abigaba, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Solomon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for convening us. I think you've had the biggest audience we've had on any Ugandan spaces. So it tells you how important this particular subject of torture is. And for starters, we are all candidates. Yeah, so first of all, you had sent me a request to speak earlier, but I had left that honor to my senior, Mr. Ofono Pondo, the government spokesperson who had appeared online, and I think he has left the spaces unceremoniously. So I'm not here to give a government position. I can't fit in those shoes, but I can make a personal comment, also maybe what government is trying to do. The bottom line is that torture is both illegal and immoral. And the president of Uganda has now on 2 occasions, he spoke in 2017, a security address and condemned the torture. He spoke again recently and condemned the torture. The president has been very categorical, and he has said that you cannot extract, you cannot extract relevant evidence from a suspect through coercion and use of all these barbaric methods. The president has been very categorical on that. And then secondly, we have so many provisions in our laws that really bar torture. The Bill of Rights in the Constitution, Chapter 4, Article 24. We have the Prevention of Torture Act of 2012. Then there is the Human Rights Act. All these ones really, reinforce each other as far as fighting torture is concerned. And we must condemn it, all of us. Good enough, there are voices in government that are standing up to this. I've been reading the New Vision today, and they say the IGP has ordered the closure of the Special Investigations Division, Chileka, where Council Pio has been, and others. It has come out prominently as one of the places where these inhumane acts happen. So that's a step taken in the right direction, closure of SID Chileka. Yeah, so government is taking some steps, albeit slowly, to manage this situation. Yeah, so I want to pose a question also to our friends, Council Pio, Council Okuda, and other activists. Sarah Birete, goodbye, you're here. The Human Rights Act says that any public officer who commits these acts of torture shall be held personally liable, prosecuted, and sanctioned. Yes, we have dwelled so much on these problems, the victims, parading them in the media and whatever. I do not want to downplay anything here. However, my question is, you've been some of the people that have been in these facilities. Take an example like Chireka, where Council Pio was. You can identify the commander of the facility, and you have the Human Rights Act empowering you to pursue private prosecution of this commander of the facility where you were tortured. How come we are not seeing anybody being prosecuted by the activists? I think this is one of the directions that we should take. Activists, you're empowered by the Human Rights Act to prosecute some of these people. Let's also start taking that direction. Solomon, I think that's what I wanted to say. I thank you for the opportunity.
Duncan Abigaba, thank you very much. While you're saying that, it was interesting that human rights activists should take those commanders to court. And I can see Councillor Nicholas Opio is raising his hands. I think he's going to answer that. The question, though, would be, why isn't the Attorney General doing that? You see, why isn't the Attorney General of Uganda going to court and taking those people to court for torturing people? Councillor Nicholas Opio, this question was posed to you as well. You can come in.
Well, thank you. I didn't want to speak. I have had to jump out of my engagement to answer to Duncan because he's a person of interest. He's very interesting character. Let me disabuse him of short memory. When General Kale Kaihura endorsed and publicly supported the torture of Kizza Besigye and his supporters, we went to court. We filed a case. Andrew Karamaji is here, he will confirm that. We filed a case against General Kale Kaihura and 9 other police officers. We almost lost our lives. Goons hired by people in police who were deployed in the courthouse to lynch the lawyers. All of you remember what Chitata and Border 2012 did when we attempted to do that. So it's not for lack of trying. I have filed several cases of individual liabilities against individuals. And guess who swears affidavit in support of those individuals? The director of legal affairs in police. They're the ones who have the evidence. They're the ones who destroy the evidence and come to court to block any such. I have several judgments against individual officers. None of them is respected. And so I think that people like Duncan could do a lot better getting to grips with what people are doing to hold individuals to account. But secondly, and more importantly, the Attorney General can go to court to prosecute Mabirizi for contempt of court, but sit idly when officers at CMI torture Kakwenza. Really, the responsibility is in the hands of the duty bearer, to whom we pay taxes, to whom we sign a social contract, and we cannot sweep away that responsibility and saying, how about you activists? In fact, we don't have a duty. The state has a duty to hold these individuals to account. Duncan, you may not know this, but I wrote the Prohibition and Prevention of Torture Act in 2005, led the campaign for its enactment. I think what you are referring to as the Human Rights Act, I think you meant the Human Rights Enforcement Act. A lot of these things are things we have done, given you the tools to be able to do these things as a state. And you have done absolutely nothing. The second thing is this, and lastly, and I have to run, is to say this, that the result of this kind of work, you see, people like General Kale Kaihura are now in places that we all know. People like Baroza is hiding in Canada, was a personal assistant to the IGP. People like this police officer who is supposed to be hiding in South Africa, the short man who used to be at CPS. Eventually, these things catch up with you. Duncan will not be the deputy spokesperson of that place on Acacia Avenue forever. He will move on. These things will follow you. And I think that it's up to us to stand up to be counted, Today you might go after me because you think. And I'll tell you just the last story, just to end it here. The Chireka facilities like Nalufenya, closing it doesn't solve the problem. Didn't we close VCCU? Didn't we close RRU? It hasn't solved the problem. So these cosmetic things of closing buildings does not solve the problem. When I went to Chireka to help somebody who had been detained, I think his name was Kawoya, that facility had a deputy commandant called Okecho from Tororo. Okecho's own brother had been abducted by CMI from Tororo, was being detained at SIU Chireka across the road from his office. He couldn't see his own brother and wanted asking me to help him get his brother out. This is the deputy commandant of the Special Investigations Unit. So you can see the extent of the problem. Bona Duncan, we need to get you out of your bubble so that you realize the plight of so many Ugandans who have suffered in the hands of people we know. I have put the names of individuals who are involved in these actions in public. Some of them, you know them. I see sometimes you say, we condemn torture. People who torture people should go to hell. When you have the ability to send them to prison and you don't, those statements mean nothing. We've got to ask of people who we pay as taxpayers, who we give a duty to do their job. We must ask Kasinje to stop tweeting, but go and make sure that these people are arrested. We cannot thank him for tweeting. We must ask him to do the duty for which he is recruited, paid by taxpayers to do. We cannot ask people in government, how people in government, Pondo condemns torture. You have a duty, you have a role. Do it. Thank you, Solomon.
Council, thank you. Duncan, do you want to react to what Council Nicholas has said?
Yeah, thank you, Solomon, and thank you, Council Nicholas, for those insights. Like I have said, if I were in Opondo's shoes, maybe I would have been in position to perhaps make more commitments than I can do right now in my position. We agree with the Council Nicholas on some things. We disagree on some things. But the bottom line is that torture is illegal, it is inhumane, and it is immoral. We should all condemn it. The issue of Attorney General, I cannot speak for the Attorney General, but I've read his statement today in one of the dailies. I think Daily Monitor, to be specific, re-echoing the position of His Excellency the President, that torture has no breath. Torture has no breath, and it's the Attorney General says it. Evidence obtained through torture is inadmissible in court. So whoever is doing this, they are actually wasting time. But just say something about the Attorney General not prosecuting these people, and the Council Nicholas would agree with me on this. I think the Attorney General also does not know where some of these people are. Because if Council Pio is picked from Kamocha at the market, they are eating food, and is taken somewhere, it could be anywhere. It's very hard for the Attorney General to know that so and so picked Council Pio. But it is easy for Council Pio to say, I was taken to this facility and the commandant was so and so, and I'm taking them to court for these acts. That's what I think. So it's very hard for the Attorney General to trace everybody and all these issues that are happening. Yeah.
Duncan, can I just, if you can stay with us, let's give an example of Kakwenza's case. He has come out publicly, and he says he was in a state house, SFC facility publicly. So we clearly know from what he's saying, he actually was in the hands of the Special Forces Command. Can't then the Attorney General, if the Attorney General seeks to take on the case, or indeed the police to take on the case of this torture, we know that the Attorney General can use all the state machinery there is to actually get to collect as much evidence as he can to carry out a prosecution. So I think, in my view, you cannot absolutely say that the Attorney General doesn't know. We have seen people who have been given bail before the courts of law who are coming out literally not able to walk, and they are rearrested again and taken elsewhere to unknown locations. And then the army comes out and says, it's us who have them. Even when they're being given bail, but even when they're limping, they can barely walk. The Attorney General indeed has all the state machinery, if there is political will, to actually take on, the people who are doing these things and do a prosecution. So I think, in my view, and I don't blame you because you are not the Attorney General, you're trying to perhaps sit in for him, but you can't absolutely conclude that the Attorney General doesn't know where people or who the people who torture people are from. Duncan?
Solomon, you're pushing me into a tight corner, and you know this saying, because I believe you're from central Uganda, of onsobola komatuga gambezi to feed me to the to the hyenas or leopards.
But then
You're
this is not a
pushing
laughing matter.
I know it's not a laughing matter. I know, but you're pushing me into a tight corner, and it, I cannot say certain things in a forum of 2,500 people when they have not been sanctioned by the relevant institutions of government. So on that particular issue, however, I can say that you remember the issue of safe houses. You remember when there was a clash between Parliament and the Minister of Security then, Honorable General El Tumine. There were safe houses that were operating without being sanctioned by Uganda Police or Uganda People's Defense Forces. So in this case, I would say maybe there are facilities that belong to the Special Forces Command that are not sanctioned by the mainstream UPDF or Ministry of Defense, and even therefore the Attorney General cannot trace some of these facilities. And it happens in a security setup because in security, part of security work is classified business and things like that. So the Attorney General genuinely might know some of these facilities. I beg to submit.
Duncan Abigaba, stay with
And
us. Thank you very much. Duncan Abigaba
Solomon,
is the Deputy Director at GCIC Uganda, which is under State House of Uganda. Ivan Okuda, do you want a second? Because I wanted to give an opportunity to other people to speak.
yes,
But you're welcome.
in just a second. The assumption we're making is one that really lowers the quality of what should be a fairly more intellectual discussion than one happening in a Malwa joint in Moroto. You see, and maybe because I'm biased because I read a bit of political economy and studied that in my postgrad. So my outlook to these things is shaped by political economy studies. You've got to analyze the dichotomy of power. You've got to analyze the anatomy of power. Torture is not a weakness of the Museveni government. It is the strength of his government. Because they came to power on the strength of violence. They've maintained that power on the strength of violence in the 90s and the late 80s, where they faced resistance in the north and in the east. They beat those people to line using violence. When they faced resistance in Kasese, they used violence and all sorts of human rights violations. And when they faced an electoral contest that was probably going to go against them in 2006, against Dr. Kizza Besigye in 2001, and in 2021, they used violence. So torture is not its weakness, it's its strength. It's not the weakest link in the chain. It is the strongest link in the chain. And therefore, for the consolidation of power, Mr. Museveni and his cabal have had to essentially, A, co-opt institutions that should be doing the checks and balances. So when we speak of DPP and Attorney General and why don't you prosecute and why don't you do private prosecution, never mind the fact that the DPP under the law has power to take over your private prosecution, and what they do with your case after that is none of your business. It's between them and the court. All that is only building into one thing: the retention of power. And if you're Mr. Museveni, what would you do? Almost 40 years in power, you've lost legitimacy, you have become increasingly more unpopular. So violence and torture, a time-tested tool that brought you to power, becomes your default setting. And that's what we're seeing. And therefore, in my view, and I hope I'm being pessimistic and wrong, we cannot use institutions that have themselves been captured and a victim and are part of the script of power retention and expect that they'll act different. What would you expect of the courts of law under Idi Amin's time? To give bail to Idi Amin's political opponents? What would you expect of the courts during Obote 2 and Obote 1, when the 5 ministers at one point got arrested because they had a departure of opinion with Mr. Obote? What would you expect of the court system that tried Nelson Mandela and his anti-apartheid activists in the Rivonia trials? The courts, the DPP, and all those offices that we like to cite, the Human Rights Commission, become part of the script. And therefore, it takes me back to my earlier argument that what we have is a political crisis, what Mr. Olaro Tunu has ably called the comprehensive brokenness of a nation. And lastly, Solomon, when Mr. Museveni was confronting Idi Amin with his colleagues in the 70s, they did not imagine that preaching good manners and preaching morality to the State Research Bureau of Maria Mungu and his group was enough. They did not imagine that preaching good manners and morality to Idi Amin was enough. They did not imagine that the American Embassy or the British High Commission issuing statements was enough. They problematized the Idi Amin question as a political crisis that had to be solved politically, and that in many ways explains the change that happened then. And partly, you can extrapolate that conversation to Kenya under Arap Moi. You can extrapolate that conversation to the hallmark of the ANC struggle. The ANC struggle was not built on the idea that the Rivonia trials were a bad thing. It was built on the idea that you need to overhaul the entire system and have a chance and have an opportunity, have a window of opportunity to chart a new way forward. I do not think that in the current configuration of power, you can even have a conversation about the Human Rights Commission. What do you expect those helpless fellows trying to earn a living for their families and take their kids to Green Hill and Kampala parents to do? What do you expect of a DPP, looking at career growth and progress to do? What do you expect of the guy heading human rights desk at the Uganda Police Force? They are as captive as the rest of us. Some of them might be enablers, facilitators, abettors, and aiders of a monstrous, demonic dictatorship that has essentially capitalized on violence. From day one, Mr. Museveni wrote a thesis on the use of violence as a student at Dar es Salaam in his 20s. He knows what he's doing. I think it's those that are opposed to him that do not know what they're doing. Because first, there is a problem of misdiagnosis. I saw Jackie Lawyer, the doctor. I'm sure she has an idea about diagnosis. So there is misdiagnosis of what the problem is, and then we have wrong prescription. We lose it when we start to look at this cancer as simply one of a tissue A or tissue B. We must confront the political crisis that we face of our generation, of our time. And if we don't confront that political crisis, we shall keep running around in circles, we shall keep going for the branches and not going for the roots.
Thank you. Ivan Okuda
We
there.
must approach the Museveni question the way Mr. Museveni and his group approached the Idi Amin question, or the way the Mandelas approached the apartheid question in South Africa, or the way the Kenyans approached the Daniel Arap Moi question in Kenya. You must have a comprehensive overhaul of the system and not look at bits and bits of it. Thank you so much.
Ivan Okuda there, speaking tough. Ivan, thank you very much for your guidance and your thought process. Patrick Kanyomozi, can I come to you after I've brought in Kanare Mugume and maybe Honorable Katoro Wama? Interesting to have Honorable Katoro Wama, former member of Parliament, on the call. It would be interesting to hear from you, Sarah, and to hear from perhaps what your experience was while you were still in the House. I want to say a special thank you to the National Unity Platform, whose official handle is on the call. So I really appreciate everyone who is on the call today for being part of this space. Thank you for taking off time to listen through. Kanre Mugume, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Solomon, and many thanks to everyone who was tuning into the space. I think it is through these conversations that we raise awareness on such issues, and for me particularly, for the media side, it's important that we continue to document and publish, what is happening in the country, because you see, one day it would be Kakwenza or even you, Selwanja, how your family had to suffer through while you were arrested because of the story you were doing. The following day might be me. So the earlier we speak out, the better. Not that speaking out might, give me some sort of protection, but awareness. We cannot stop raising awareness. We cannot stop speaking out on injustices. After all, we are an arm of government. I also thought maybe as Duncan came to speak, maybe he would correct what he tweeted a few days ago, calling torture a minor mistake. Using pliers and electricity as a form of torture, that cannot be a minor mistake. But also, if it were a mistake, maybe the president would not have talked about it. Twice or thrice he's addressed himself to it. But on the other side, I think that it is important that we, as media, we continue to document each and every event that happens, but also continue to press government to come through. Because we have investigated and written about all these things. It's just government action, and it's upon government to act, and it's upon us to put pressure on government to make sure that they act. But different torture centers that have been available, some have been closed, some are still operating. Off the head, I could give you a few examples, even those that the Human Rights Commission has visited, like Chengera Best One, which used to be a property of ISO. I think that it was closed in 2019. Zana Best 3, I think that it is still operational, but I think it was being operated by ISO. We know of Chikaya. There was a place called Chikaya, Best 2. I think must have been located in Sasi or Chanja. We know of Rwamayuba. We don't know whether that, since the sacking of Kano Kaka, who used to head ISO, whether that detention center was closed. It used to be located in Kalangara. Very poorly kept facility, dirty, and used to take their people, both that have disagreed with the state, and and also those that have disagreed with individuals. We don't know. Government, I think, needs to come through and talk to us and tell us whether these detention centers have been closed. We know even detention centers in Buyiko district, I think that's around Kokonjeru, run by some other DCs there, and DISO. You see, so ISO, CMI, even at times SFC have been at the center of running these detention centers that have eventually turned into, that are illegal, by the way, that have later also turned into torture centers. So I think that for accountability purposes, as we push through, there is need for government to come out and first indicate whether these detention centers are legal, because we know that they are not, and then two, tell us why they are still open. But also closing them might not necessarily end torture. I think that I would close one and open two. Closing might be a very small step to ending torture, but might not necessarily end torture, like I think one speaker suggested before. But there's a few things that we can push as media, civil society in their spaces, and as Ugandans. One, which I think is also still difficult. Why isn't there a conduct of a medical examination of each detainee at the time he or she is detained and when the detainee is transferred to the jurisdiction of the court? Why isn't there such a thing happening? Sometimes why I say it is hard, like the manner in which Counsel Nicholas Opio was arrested from Kamocha, it gets hard to now conduct a medical examination. Once we've established that someone has been arrested and has been detained illegally, we don't know where they have been detained, but then we start to demand at least a medical examination, because you understand that when Kakwenza came out and was released, then there's some state propagandists that came on Twitter and started to say that these self-inflicted marks, and they wanted to smear a bad image on the state. But was it the case? I don't think anyone would allow such a thing. So why can't we conduct a medical examination on each detainee at the time they are arrested or detained and the time they are transferred to court or they are released, so that there's that comparison? And that should be done both in the presence of either state officials and, as a must, in the presence of a personal doctor. Why don't we push for the disbandment of security institutions that continue, or we have evidence of, that have continued to participate in torture? You see, it could be about the individuals, and I think we hosted someone on the Big Talk on a radio show on Saturday on Next Radio and NBS that said there could be rogue elements, and I think the president has also echoed the same. There could be rogue elements in some of these institutions. But you see, if the leadership of these institutions do not act, and by act I don't mean just release the detainees, but also punish what they call the rogue elements, then we know. So Duncan was talking about taking people to court. We know of the case of a military soldier that commanded the beating of journalists in Kololo. That case has never kicked off. No one has been punished for that. So clearly taking people to court, like Nicholas Opio said, might not necessarily end torture. The other thing that we can perhaps push for is compensation of victims of torture, ill treatment, or even arbitrary detention, and to make sure that that compensation is done in a very smooth and fast process. So looking through the 2019 Uganda Human Rights Commission report, they give you figures on how much money has actually been paid off, and when you see it's really people who are running for court awards and whatnot, but the people who have actually been tortured, gets very hard to be compensated. Compensation in terms of money might not necessarily give you the justice, but it shows that the state is committed to what is in the law. It's committed to upholding the rule of law. We should also push for the limitation of use of confessions as a basis for pretrial detention or arrests. Conviction to confessions really should be made, and by the way, freely, in the presence of lawyers, personal lawyers. Why do they use confessions as a basis of pretrial detention? We should be able to push for that. And I think that as different actors in our different spaces, while we document stories of that, and we should be able to suggest solutions. In this case, running the hashtag end torture might raise awareness, but might not necessarily end torture, because the state is watching. And if it were committed, I think it would have done something. So, but as different actors in our different spaces, we need to push for some of these different things to be able to see, maybe put the state on the wall as much as we can, because the council will tell you some of the things that he has drafted in the past before have been successful. So we cannot sit back and just watch as these things happen to us. One day it's Kakwenza, the other day, or the following day might be me. So thank you very much, Solomon, for the opportunity.
Gume, thank you very much. Kanri is a journalist, news anchor, and investigative journalist at NBS and Next Media. Thank you very much. Especially thank you to everyone who's on the call. Anne Whitehead, thank you very much for being part of the call. Maureen, again, I thank you. Jackie Lumbasi, Danze Edwin, thank you. Robert Mado, thank you very much.